Okay, and Rachel's gonna go before me, right? I don't see Sharon.
Sharon's is not gonna go.
Oh, maybe that, I saw an email from her, but I didn't get a chance. to look.
Okay,
That's what
she
was saying.
the speaker is not gonna be.
Oh, oh, and I see an email from me that says,
Yeah.
okay, I don't know where it is.
Anyway, I was told that the speaker was supposed to be here from American Rivers, not available.
I'll start talking when you guys tell me to start talking. When they start throwing tomatoes, I'll stop talking. Maybe.
I don't understand what's.
I'm gonna go see if I can fetch some water.
Absolutely. Get
Put that
yourself,
there.
get yourself set.
Okay, thank you for the idea.
Oh, yeah. There is
What are y'all doing this evening?
Doing great, thank you. How about you?
Oh, I could be better.
Right now, we're on. So, yeah, they got down the back going south. The birds. Yeah. Yeah, it is. Thanks.
There are a couple slides ahead of that.
I thought this was the first.
There should be a title. statement.
There was one. Well, hang on, I'm gonna click it. I've got it. Give me 7.
Can I identify you? Yeah, there we go.
You're satisfied then?
I'm satisfied. now.
Okay.
To be on camera, do I need to be in the? Okay, yeah, pretty straightforward. So this was. What's your finance?
I don't know who started it. Did I tell you? No, I can't do that.
I understand.
No, I didn't get it.
Oh, what? I can do it. You can do it all.
Or we're gonna do doing, yes.
Thank you so much for being here with us this evening for our Prescott Audubon Society Window on Nature program
No, I just
featuring Michael Byrd
play with
with
my mouse.
Prescott Creeks. My name is Maria. I serve as the secretary for Prescott Audubon Society. And I just want to welcome you and show you, or point you rather, to the exit in the room. There's an exit here, an exit here. Also, the restrooms, should you need them, are directly back through this wide lighted doorway. Continue to enjoy snacks or begin enjoying them if you've yet to, and make yourselves at home and comfortable. I will introduce our speaker. So how many of you in the room have heard of the organization Prescott Creeks? Right, practically everyone. If you've been around Prescott for any length of time, you know the organization that Michael represents as the executive director. Just a tiny bit about Michael. He is originally from the Midwest and came to college at a place called Prescott College. Wonder where that is. And never left. So we have the organization that he represents to thank for many of the riparian restoration projects in our area and in the surrounding watersheds, most notably the Watson Woods Riparian Preserve. So if you've enjoyed any birding in Watson Woods, Michael can tell you all about the history of that restoration effort. So without further ado, please enjoy the presentation by Michael Byrd.
Thank you, Maria, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. It's a long time since I've spoken to Audubon. But the last time was a great experience. So I was asked to speak about the restoration and conservation work that our organization has done at Watson Woods Riparian Preserve. And as I get started, am I driving? Or
You're driving.
As I get started, just a little bit about me. As Maria said, I'm from the Midwest originally. Spent a couple of years at Ohio State, and it's just a ginormous school. And I realized that that wasn't what I needed. And so I kind of went to the other end of the spectrum and came here to Prescott College. Spent about 2.5 years at Prescott College and graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree in environmental conservation. And specialized in resource management with a minor in writing literature. So I've been fortunate to be utilizing my degree while in 2 years. And as a student at Prescott College, I met some of the folks who were running Prescott Creeks Preservation Association. They had recently established the preserve at Watson Woods, and I worked on my senior project writing with a team of folks, the first management plan for that preserve. So from some perspectives, I'm still working on my senior project. I'll let you guys do the math on how long this lasted. But original title was preserve manager, and then elevated to executive director quite a while ago. That's what. So I've been around for a little while. Prescott Creeks, we are a local not-for-profit organization. We have a mission to achieve healthy watersheds and clean waters in central Arizona. We do that for people in wildlife. There are a number of different tools that we use, everything from protection to restoration, education, with a little bit of advocacy thrown in. And I really look at the advocacy kind of a lot in the education realm, as working with our decision makers and leaders, trying to help them understand why riparian areas are important so that they can make good decisions for our community. The history, we've been around for quite a while, since 1990. Betty Bridgewater and Betty Siegfried had taken a trip to San Antonio, Texas, and visited the Riverwalk there.
Oh, yeah.
I've never been, I've seen pictures of it, but they were sufficiently inspired by that experience that they said, hey, we don't have the San Antonio River, but we've got Granite Creek in our town. Let's go back and start an organization and see if we can do something with the creek to have it be a focal point for our community. And they did just that. And kind of their keystone project was the trail that we have along the creek downtown. We now know it as the Greenway Trail. But they initially started that trail. They brought together community members and property owners. And each property owner said, okay, we'll allow a trail on our section, we'll take care of it. And they did that for a number of years, ran into some challenges that they said, okay, this exceeds what we're prepared to accomplish. And the group went inactive. It was inactive for a very short period of time because there were some folks from Prescott College, largely, not exclusively, who got very interested in this place called Watson Woods downstream. Back in the early 1990s, that was kind of way out on the edge of town, in a very wild place compared to how it is now. But they were successful at establishing a preserve in that area. It's all city-owned property, and the preserve was established with a 25-year lease with the city of Prescott. And if you can do that math, our lease matured in 2020, and we have renewed that as we've gotten in our check mark down toward the bottom. So other things that we've done, we're widely known for an event that we lead every spring called Granite Creek Cleanup. About 500 community members come out and pick up trash. And then we worked with community stakeholders on really looking at surface water quality issues that we have associated with Granite Creek and other creeks in the area to try to understand why is the surface water quality not great, and what can we do as a community to try to improve those conditions. And so we've had our fingers in a lot of different things over the years, but today we're going to focus largely on the riparian preserve. So when we're talking about riparian preserves, a lot of times I like to start with where are we in the landscape? How do humans fit the landscape? And so a great way to do that is to think about watersheds. So we are part of the Byrd River watershed, which is part of much bigger watersheds. We are specifically in the Granite Creek watershed, which flows to the north to the Byrd, and then the Byrd flows to the east and then down to the south, ultimately joining the Salt River. Is this on the agenda? So I've said watershed about 4 or 5, maybe 6 or 8 times at this point. Let's see a show of hands. Who thinks they know the definition for a watershed? Okay, let's see what you guys can get. Is a watershed A, an area that retains water like swamp or marsh? Okay. Not a lot of votes there. Is it B, a small building where we store water? Is it C, an area that drains to a specific water? Everybody likes that one. And then is it D, none of these? No takers on that one. Correct. You guys are a smart audience. So yeah, it's an area that drains to a specific water. And I really think watersheds are a great concept. A lot of times, you know, I don't think I heard the word watershed until I was here in my 20s. And I was talking to a 6-year-old a number of years ago, and I said watershed. Oh, I better explain that. And she waved me off about 2 words into my explanation, saying, "We learned that in school last year." So I'm super excited about that. But watersheds, it really helps us kind of place ourselves in the landscape and think about how does our landscape work. We used to participate with a group that actually asked people to list their watershed address. So we would be Granite Creek, Byrd River, Salt River, and you just take it downstream until you get to the ocean. Whereas, you know, now our address is, you know, I'm 1100 South Terrace. What does that tell us about the landscape? Zilch. So with, you know, riparian areas and preservation and restoration, we like to think in terms of how does the landscape work? So the little graphic here kind of shows the watershed boundary, the high points. All the water that's coming out of these rain clouds flows into the stream down the lake. Maybe that eventually flows out to the ocean. Pretty simple once it's explained, but not everybody has taken time to do that. So again, kind of looking on a state level, we've got the state of Arizona, and I think I counted that up. There's maybe like 15 different watersheds, but we can break this down further. And here in the Prescott area, where we have Granite Creek is where most of the water flows to, we also have Aspen Creek right here behind the church. And if you go a little further south, we've got Yosemite Creek, and each one of those areas has their own watershed area that all drains into that creek. So they ultimately come down, join Granite Creek, and then in good years, the surface water maybe makes it to the river. Another view kind of the watershed, one of the features, as I've been describing, is the creeks. The creeks are really kind of that main feature within our watersheds. So a number of years ago, we worked with the Charlotte Hall Museum through an Arizona Game and Fish grant and put together this map that showed different creeks. No watershed boundaries shown there, but we kind of helped by all these colored lines depict the vegetation that you find along the creeks. Up at the headwaters of the creeks, where they tend to be narrower and steeper, there are just a couple of species represented, where down here at Watson Woods, we've got a whole lot of diversity there. And that's because of the shape of the land down at Watson Woods. So we'll come to that a little bit further. So as we talk about riparian, hopefully we all know that riparian refers to the habitat adjacent to the water's edge, or stream side is a simple way to kind of think about riparian. Super diverse, lots going on in those ecosystems. Most of our wildlife, 75%, are dependent on these riparian areas here in Arizona. They represent a very small portion of the land, less than 1%. And there are estimates that we've lost 90% of the riparian areas that were here pre-Western Southern. So in the last 150 years, we've lost 90% of these really important habitats. Here in Arizona, you can pick them out from the uplands because they kind of are these ribbons of green that flow through the landscape. So if you're up on top of Thumb Butte or Granite Mountain, look down and look for those ribbons of green, and that's where the water is. That's where the creeks are. Some of the key members of those riparian ecosystems, cottonwoods. I think we all know cottonwoods here in the Prescott area. We actually have 2 species of cottonwoods. The Fremont cottonwood that is fairly common, has kind of that broad deltoid shaped leaf. And then we have narrowleaf cottonwoods. And the first narrowleaf cottonwoods that I ever met were over on Indian Creek. When I saw those and stopped and said, these are weird looking willows. And I looked closer and later figured out that they were actually cottonwoods. And these 2 species actually hybridize naturally. And we have a 3rd species of cottonwood called the Hinckley's cottonwood. One of the cool things about Hinckley's cottonwoods is they reproduce asexually. So if there's disturbance to their roots, a lot of times you'll get new cottonwoods growing up. And from a restoration perspective, we can use that to our advantage because they reproduce asexually. We end up with clonal stands of Hinckley's cottonwoods, much like aspens. And we can plant those on the edges of marginal habitats with the hope that they will expand out into the less ideal habitat where we might not be able to get cottonwood established. Willows are the other big component that we have here in our area. We have 2 tree species, the red willow and the gooding willow. Gooding willow, by comparison, is relatively, it's poorly represented here in this watershed. Most likely to find it over Willow Lake. I'm not quite sure why that is, whether it's a moisture issue or whether we're at the top of its elevational range. We just know there's not as much gooding willow here in this watershed. Whereas throughout much of the rest of the state, it's probably the dominant willow. And then we have 2 species of willows that are shrubs. So in general, trees tend to be single-stemmed plants that exceed 20 feet in height, whereas shrubs have multiple stems and usually don't get over 20 feet. So as you're out and about, you will probably encounter both the arroyo willow and the coyote willow. There are some ways to tell all these willows apart, but it's tricky. You got to look at them a lot. And I'm really good at it here because we've only got 4 species. If I go to the White Mountains, there are 23 to sort out, and I'm as lost as the next person. So cottonwoods and willows make up our dominant vegetation types here. Some of the wildlife that we would maybe expect to find, thanks to Everett Sanborn for providing all these great images, everything from raccoons to mule deer. The porcupines are out there. A lot of folks have seen them at Willow. On one of my first visits to Watson Woods Riparian Preserve, we saw some tracks and were debating what kind of animal those tracks came from. And one of us was speculating that maybe it was porcupine. And as we were headed back to the car, we found the skeleton of a porcupine with a bunch of quills, and its jaw still was on my mantle at home. And just this summer, we found a deceased porcupine at Watson Woods as well. So yeah, interesting stuff. And then bobcats are a pretty common sighting at the preserve, and a pretty exciting thing to see for me. Big kids are always cool. We've got lots of creatures that live on the surface and below the surface of the ground. A lot of different snakes. Common king snakes are very frequently seen at the preserve, as well as garter snakes. This is actually my daughter holding a very small garter snake that we found over in Grand Creek Park, right in the grass. She just reached down and grabbed it. So check this out, Dad. So yeah, a lot of different critters. And then did I break the no the remote?
Let me forward move you.
It's flashing.
I got you.
Okay, perfect. And so critters that actually live in the stream for part of their life cycle. These are tiger salamanders, and the ones that are pictured here, Jessie Rack over at the Natural History Institute, she and I got a report that somebody thought they saw salamanders in Granite Creek, right downtown. And the call came in and the caller said, hey, are there tiger salamanders in our creeks? And I said, well, maybe. And he told me the story. And so in their, the first part of their life stage, they actually live in the water. So they've got these gill structures. And there was some question about whether this might be the form of a salamander that does not leave the water when they reach maturity. So we called up our herpetologist, the specialist who studies reptiles and amphibians, and we said, Erica, we think we've got something cool. She said, send me pictures. And she got the two state experts, herpetology experts down at ASU to get on a Zoom call with us. And we all looked at these pictures and talked about what we had. And we know they're salamanders. That's all we know. So this was 2001 that we first saw them in the downtown reach. We had seen them, we've seen them at the preserve, we've seen them over on Butte Creek, but we hadn't seen them on Granite. And so, you know, we all got very excited and said, this is exciting. And then winter came and they disappeared. And last summer they were sighted in 2 different pools. So hopefully that will continue to be the case, and hopefully the improvements that are happening in the creek downtown will support the salamanders as well. Yeah, I think you're driving Paul. Wood ducks. I said when Everett sent me these pictures, I looked at them and I said, if I could be a duck, I would be a wood duck. They are just really fantastic. Showy creatures, and they seem like our creeks around here. So we can go to the next slide. And then great horned owls. We've all seen great horned owls. I get really excited about some of the common stuff. I love ravens. When I was a student, I had a raven's nest in a tree over our house. And down at the preserve, we enjoy quite a few raven's nests. I believe the nest with the chicks in it, we had a trail camera up on that nest a couple of years ago and got some pretty decent pictures of that. But it's almost not a visit to Watson Woods Riparian Preserve if you don't see a great thing that. So I think we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that we've got an important bird area right here in our community. I tried to count up how many were on there. Maybe the Audubon folks know, but I think I counted about 36 IVAs in the state. Does that sound right? There's a lot of them. You can see all the little red banners that represent different IVAs throughout the state. And if we go to the next slide, we show a map of the IVA that's in 2 pieces, the Watson and Willow Lakes ecosystem, important bird area. And Watson Woods Riparian Preserve, you hit the next slide, is roughly a quarter. I'm not sure what the acreage, overall acreage is, but we're a good chunk of that important bird area. So again, all city of Prescott owned property with the red line that's shown there, and basically all the riparian forest upstream from Watson Lake. So very exciting. And so again, we established the preserve in 1995 with the city of Prescott. We had a 25-year management lease that matured in 2020, and we successfully renegotiated that lease, or actually extended it for an additional 25-year term. So Watson Woods Riparian Preserve is Watson Woods Riparian Preserve until 2045. Hopefully I will not still be working on the senior project. We'll see. But you know, I think in 95, there wasn't a whole lot of this kind of thing that was happening. The Central Arizona Land Trust had secured some youth properties, but there wasn't a whole lot. This was kind of out of the box, and so it was a big deal that the city went with this. Go to the next slide. As we prepared that Watson Woods Riparian Preserve comprehensive plan, what we really wanted to do was we recognized there was a lot going on this piece of property. It had a very interesting history. In the Fort Whipple days, it was utilized for stock grazing, sheep and cattle, schoolwood cutting, and then it became just kind of a public commons that nobody was really taking any responsibility for or taking care of. Mid-20th century, it's all trash dumping. Trash is still in the ground at Watson Woods. And it's a lot of sand and gravel extraction. You pull out your USGS map, it'll show that as a gravel pit instead of Watson Woods Riparian Preserve. So we took what we call an adaptive management approach. We defined 4 different program areas: management, inventory, monitoring, restoration, and education. And really, you know, if this graphic were accurate, it would show arrows going both directions and across the center. But you know, as we conduct our inventories and then monitor over time, that helps us understand what the ecosystem is doing, what directions it's headed, and we can make corrective actions as we go. Maybe those will influence management decisions or direct how we approach restoration. And then education fits into just about everything we do. Coming out and talking to groups like this. Tuesday is supposed to be Master Naturalist class. And so anytime we can get out and tell our story, we're happy to do that. So management, a lot of nuts and bolts stuff at the get-go. As a public commons, there were no gates or fences or signs identifying what that area was. And in some respects, that was kind of a heavy lift. There were people who were used to going down there and running their 4-wheel drive, and they didn't like that we put up the gate and said they couldn't do that. So it was a little bit of a learning curve, getting folks educated. We had some brochures. And I think one of the best things that we did was we installed some groundwater monitoring. Which I've got a slide. For the inventory and for the monitoring, we really wanted to look at all of our different resources. And so one of the key resources that we looked at was the stream channel. The stream channel is why Watson Woods Riparian Preserve is what it is. The stream flows through there and it allows the vegetation to be there, which creates habitat for wildlife and specifically our birds. So we brought in some partners from Natural Channel Design. They are stream restoration specialists. They're based out of Flagstaff, and they went in and they measured everything that could be measured. They measured how big the sand was and how big the boulders were and how wide the channel was. And they put all that into their magic spreadsheet there, which actually ties into research that they've done all around the Southwest to help us understand what Granite Creek within the Watson Woods area ought to look like. And so from that, we were able to put together a restoration plan. So let's go to the next slide. One of the other things that we knew we wanted to know about is what's happening with the water underneath the ground. We can track the water in the stream, and that's pretty exciting. We can see that. But for anybody who's been around and visited Watson Woods in the summertime, sometimes it can be a really dry place. You would be hard pressed to find any water on the surface. And so when the preserve was being set up, we knew that it got dry. The question was, how dry does it get? We have cottonwoods and willows. We know cottonwoods and willows have to have their root systems in the groundwater. So we said, well, we're pretty sure there's water under there. Is it 10 feet down? Is it 20 feet down? Is it 50 feet down? So we got a grant from the Heritage Fund to install 8 groundwater monitoring wells. And we spread those out through the preserve. We kind of stretch out from downstream to upstream. And we've got them on both sides of the stream. And next slide. We've got a volunteer who goes out 52 times a year, roughly stretched a week of time. He's been doing that for 17 years for us. Russell Posha is his name. If you run into him in the grocery store, please tell him thank you. But we manually measure the depth of the groundwater, and then we chart that up on an elevation above sea level. So feet above sea level, so we can kind of see how they all compare to each other. And what this really shows us is, here we are this is last year, 2002, we can't see it up at the top there. We started the year off with something happening right here because the groundwater came up higher in the elevation. I believe we had a little snowstorm at the beginning of the year. And then throughout the rest of the winter and into the spring, it's just kind of a slow decline until we get to May and June, and then it starts to get a little steep. What happens in May and June? It's very dry, it warms up. And all our trees have leaves and it's windy. And those cottonwood leaves are shaking and they're evapotranspiring a lot of moisture. And so, you know, we see a little more rapid decline, and then here in July and August, something pretty cool happened. Starts going back up because it started raining. We had some monsoon storms. And so you can see there's a whole lot of up and down through the monsoon, and then in the fall it kind of stabilized. But I think we got back to maybe a little higher than where we were. We've asked some of our partners to take a look at our 20+ year record of groundwater data and try to make some observations about what the long-term trends are. We've just been looking at it from an annual basis, but over that period, are we seeing declines? Are we seeing it going up and down? What's happening? So we'll have that data available the next show. So groundwater information has been super helpful. We can use that as we think about, should we plant cottonwoods over here, or are they going to do better? We also wanted to know what vegetation is at Watson Woods Riparian Preserve. So we got grant funding from the Arizona Water Protection Fund, conducted botanical vegetation survey where we installed permanent sampling points and also put together a plant list. Worked with Dr. Mark Baker, a botanist out of Chino Valley, who has actually repeated that study for us twice since then. So we can see how things are changing. When the data gets wrapped up, it's as if we're looking at a stand of cottonwood trees. And so we can overlay the next survey on that and really see how that stand is changing. Have trees died? Do we have a different species composition, or are things just getting bigger? So it gives us a lot of information. If we jump to the next slide, we also put together a plant list. I want to say we've got about 350 different species represented at Watson Woods. And I know maybe 10%. But we've got the straight list, and then Mark also prepared herbarium specimens for us. So we can go and look at those and try to understand what's happening. So the stream and the vegetation were kind of the two key pieces. We have also been doing bird monitoring in conjunction with Prescott Audubon Society. We have looked at the reptiles and amphibians. We've looked at small mammals. We have looked at macroinvertebrates. The one formal study that we have not done is large mammals. And I'm not sure why that is, maybe because we can see that there are deer running around. We have not officially documented any any mountain lions in the preserve. Had anecdotal, I saw a mountain lion out there. But unless we've got a photograph, I don't trust it necessarily. So let's go to the next slide. So with all that information that we put together in the beginning, what was the inventory? So we wanted to know what was there so we could see how it was changing over time. Again, funded through the Arizona Water Protection Fund, we put together a restoration plan that really kind of said, here's what needs to happen out on the ground, and here's how much it's going to cost. And then we went and tried to get that funded. That plan basically said, the channel, we're going to restore the function of Grant Creek as kind of the primary objective. And we'll enhance the habitats and restore habitats that go along with the channel. We'll do a lot of restoration along the way. And one of the collateral benefits that we get from all that work is that that's going to help with our surface water quality. We got funding again from the Arizona Water Protection Fund Commission and the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality. It's about $1.5 million project, 5 years of on the ground work, 2 years of kind of heavy lifting, construction, pushing dirt around, and then 3 years of project performance monitoring and education work. Those sorts of things. So the engineers did their engineer thing. They drew, a fancy map with lots of lines on it. That I always have to squint and really study these things to figure out what to say. But what this is showing is we're going to contour the floodplain. We're going to build some wetlands. And we actually moved 4 reaches of Granite Creek. So if we go to the next slide. I'm too close to the speakers. So Granite Creek at the time of our restoration plan followed the green dash line that you can see over here. Highway 89 is up here, and you can just see the Peavine Trail down this. So all this area is the river bottom of floodplain. And part of what was going on was when the gravel mine was here, they actually moved the channel around. And when they left in the mid-70s, they didn't really restore the channel to a natural flow path. So it had all these weird right angles in it, and the channel was very deep and narrow. And so anytime we got flood flows, it just kind of raced down the channel to Watson Lake. It didn't escape out onto the floodplain. And one of the things that you can see here, you can see the cottonwoods and the willows, the big woody vegetation, but there were vast areas of the floodplain that just had no vegetation. And in a healthy riparian system, we would expect more widely distributed cottonwood groves. So we said, okay, we think we can address this by moving the channel out to the center of the floodplain. So where this blue line is. And if you go to the next slide, that's what it looked like after we implemented the project. So we had a lot of big yellow machines pushing dirt around. And one of the things that we did, we left most of the channel where it had been because I was going to hold water. It makes great habitat. We've got lots of cattails in there. But where it diverged from the primary channel, we actually filled that in with some of the excavated material so that the stream didn't recapture into those areas. The new stream channel here, the white that you see along the banks is actually erosion control cloth. And we actually planted willows in those banks to hold the streams together. Rather than use a bunch of man-made materials or steel and concrete, we used vegetation like nature would do. And then over here, this is a wetland feature that we've got. And I think most folks are probably familiar with the wildlife pond here. So if you go to the next slide. So there's the big yellow machines kind of making a mess as we were doing it. It was very much a construction project. We tried to do a lot of community outreach. We had a lot of volunteers working with us so that folks weren't calling the city saying, oh my gosh, what are they doing? If we go to the next slide, involving volunteers in the project is a key component of that project and pretty much anything that Prescott Creeks does. Planting willows here, installing erosion control devices, variety of different activities is what volunteers are involved in. And so this is kind of exciting for me. This is a picture from immediately after we completed the project in April of 2009. So you can kind of see what we were seeing from that aerial view. This is actually looking pretty much straight north from the Prescott Lakes Parkway Bridge. And then the bottom photograph is just earlier this last fall of September 2022. And so I always like to ask people, what do you notice that's different between these two photographs?
The houses, the houses.
Yeah, so that's one of the things everybody zeroes into. Oh my gosh, it's a little bit obscured up on the top here. But yeah, I think that neighborhood's called Astoria, maybe. This was just open land that was not developed at that point in time. But where I really get excited by all this green stuff in the foreground, you can't even see the Granite Creek Channel in that bottom photograph because those dang cottonwoods are blocking the view. But for me, that's really exciting because I planted a lot of these cottonwoods. And to see them grow up to a point where we're starting to lose our landmarks. And so next time we go to shoot that photograph, it might be difficult to get it lined up. We might not know if it's the same location. So we can see the hillside, and if you really zoom in, there's some power line towers up there, that sort of thing. The recently planted vegetation is starting to get to the point where you can't see some of the pre-existing vegetation. So this is, it's kind of an anecdotal, it's kind of a soft measure of progress, but it's something that we can all really appreciate because you can see the difference between those two. Yeah, so I get excited about seeing this. This is one of our tools that we use. But we also use a lot of quantitative data as well. The stream engineers came in and measured everything again in 6 ways from Sunday and said, okay, you think it's holding together. We're due to go back in and remeasure things, which we will do in the coming years. But if we go to the next slide. So one of the things that we did, I mentioned we built wetlands. And when we designed those wetlands, we sent in our plans because we were funded by state agencies. They sent it through their water rights division and they said, you can't do that unless you have a water right. And we said, oh no, what are we going to do? So we all got together and huddled and we said, if we bring our bottom elevation for those wetlands up 6 inches, it passes muster with the water rights people, but they weren't very wet initially. So we kind of called them ephemeral wetlands. They were just kind of low sandy spots. And I think this map is 2014. So we built the project in 2009. So in 5 years, 4 of our 6 wetlands naturally converted to actual bona fide wetlands. And those are a little bit difficult to see on this slide, but the green polygons. I think we have 10, maybe 12 acres of actual bona fide wetlands at the preserve. And again, those are very productive habitats. We get a lot of benefits from those, including ecosystem services. So future work is we're looking at where can we construct additional wetland habitats within the preserve. We go to the next slide. Quick little graphic. Just showing kind of the wetlands. And this is kind of put together from a stormwater improvement standpoint. So ecosystem services, water gets captured, it gets cleaned as it filters through the soil, and plants will uptake some of the pollutants. You want that water to infiltrate down into your groundwater, and then it releases downstream. Obviously, we get a lot of biological fauna happening within those ecosystems, butterflies, and that's a salamander hanging out down there. And then the birds are eating all those critters as well. So more wetlands we're excited about. Go to the next slide. So kind of coming back around to the IBA, Watson Woods Riparian Preserve is an important part of an important bird area. And when we were conducting or planning the restoration work, we said, hey, this is going to have an impact on birds, ideally a positive one, because we were trying to increase the habitat. And we said, let's get out there and study that. So we used approved methodologies for the IBA. And Karen O'Neill, I'm sure a lot of you know Karen O'Neill, she was on our board for about 10 years. Karen really spearheaded this effort and led this until 2021, I think. So a lot of years of working on that. We kind of divided up the preserve into a variety of different areas and transects and utilized, I think it was 3 different methodologies to assess what was happening with the bird life preserve. So we go to the next slide. We zoom in on the map a little bit. Initially, we did 3 different transects along the creek. Then we had trying to remember what that method is called, a point count survey, and then at the wildlife pond and maybe one other location we did a census survey. And I can't speak super knowledgeably about what the difference between all those is. Sue probably could. But we'll save that for the chit chat afterward. But pretty intensive monitoring. If we jump to the next slide, during the restoration projects from 2009 to 2012. What was that? 5 or 6 surveys, 6 survey periods each year. So that's a lot of going out there and looking at birds and writing all that stuff down. And if I remember correctly, this was before Byrd was a thing.
Yeah.
So we were doing it all on paper. Byrd kind of came into existence toward the end of that, and we simplified the method to just the transects. And those continued up until 2021. And we just didn't really get our act together quick enough to not miss a year of sample. And so we are actually working on getting those surveys restarted in 2023. I've got a sign-up sheet in the back if anybody is interested for participate in those. We need folks who know what birds they're seeing. I'm great to go out there and talk about the management stuff, but I'm not a qualified birder. So it's been, you know, a great service for us. And I was going to count up how many different species we had identified. And I couldn't find that data this afternoon. But I know when I looked at it about a year ago, I was trying to figure out, I was impressed with the number. I don't know, does that number stick in your head at all, Sue? I'm gonna say it's maybe 150, 200. Maybe. I lack context, but I was impressed. So okay, we jump to the next slide. One of the other things that we've been very excited about and really viewing as kind of a success story with the restoration work is during the restoration work, I believe was the first time we saw common blackhawks nest in Watson Woods Riparian Preserve. And they have almost been there every single year since. And so for us, that's kind of the exciting thing is where's their nest going to be this year? And can we see it? Where it's been the last couple of years, it's really difficult to see. There's one spot that I've found where we can see the nest without freaking out the birds. And that's really the most important part is we want to see what's going on, but we don't want to disturb them. So we jump to the next, and I'll just point out the bottom right photograph there, that's a hummingbird that's given that hawk. I don't know how we got that picture of that, but it was pretty cool. So this is, I think it's a combination of photos from the nest last year in 2021 and in 2022. In 2021, there was just one chick in the nest. And you can see, I kind of think of the dark crystal and those creatures, if you guys are familiar with the Muppets. So that top left picture kind of makes me think of that, you know, just sitting there being very stoic. And then the other two shots, I think, are the chick in the nest from 2022. But in 2022, we had one chick hatch and we thought it was just a nest with one chick. And then a week later, we saw a second one. And the other kind of exciting thing was we believe that the pair, when they showed up in the spring of 2022, that their fledgling, the young from 2021 was still with them. So we had a family group of 3, and then as the season progressed, we either quit being able to tell or weren't seeing the youngster. So we jump to the next slide. The other thing that we've been working very closely with Prescott Audubon on is thinking about the American kestrels. I think Dave Frechette came to us, what year was that? 2015-ish, maybe? And said, yeah, 2016, and said, hey, we want to put some nest boxes for American kestrels in the preserve. And I said, we got kestrels everywhere. That was almost like you couldn't go to Watson Woods and not see a kestrel. And I learned that American kestrels were in decline across their North American range. And so, of course, we wanted to be part of that. And so I think at present we've got 4 boxes within the preserve, and Dave Frechette manages that program, and we work very closely with him on that. If we jump to the next slide. Wendy Wonderly got this, you know, so they're taking advantage of the reserved parking. So okay, next slide. There's Dave holding one of the chicks that had come out of, I don't know if that's actually the preserve, but it's representative. You can see the nest box up on top there. And we have been doing that for that 6 or 7 years now. The first year we had, I think 3 of our 4 boxes utilized, and a whole handful of chicks came out of that. All those got banded in coordination with Arizona Fish Department. And then over the last couple of years, we have actually been releasing rehabilitated kestrels in the area. And I think some of the folks here may have attended the release over at adjacent to Heritage Park, Zoological Sanctuary last year. That was kind of an exciting release. So we've got a photograph of the bird coming out of the box. That's Tuck Jacobson, our contact with Arizona Game and Fish. And I'll tell you, there's nothing more rewarding seeing a bird go launching up into the air. So we've got high hopes for kestrels in the area, and there's a lot of great work that's happening. We're pleased to be part of that. So I just wanted to recognize Dave and Prescott Audubon Society for their efforts on that as well. Okay. And you know, all of the restoration work that we did, we said, you know, here's why we're doing this. We want to benefit our native wildlife. And we identified common blackhawks and things like yellow-billed cuckoos and southwestern yellow flycatchers. And 2 years ago, we saw our first cuckoo in the preserve, and that was pretty exciting. I think it was just visiting, but Bob Wygant got this fantastic picture that he shared with us, and hopefully they will continue to see the preserve as suitable habitat. So we jump to the next slide. I just wanted to represent the southwestern willow flycatcher. We have not been seeing those in the preserve yet either, but that's kind of our end goal. Is, you know, one of the driving factors is we wanted to create suitable habitat for these birds that are lacking suitable habitat. So it hasn't happened quite yet, but things are continuing and changing, and hopefully they will come. We haven't talked a lot about surface water quality, but I threw this in. There's a long history with surface water quality. Prescott Creeks kind of initiated some work with that about the same time we were doing the restoration project, because we had seen a fish kill in the early 2000s in Watson Lake. And depending on where you were on the creek, sometimes it was just downright gross. And so we started asking questions that were particularly very popular. And reached out to the Department of Environmental Quality and said, hey, what's happening with this? And they said, well, we're going to get to it, but it's way down in the line. And we said, well, we're here, and how can we help? Long story short, they funded us. We put together a plan working with community stakeholders and said, here's what we think needs to happen. And it was really implementing natural features like restoration work, kind of in the context, we call it green infrastructure. It's creating little wetlands, like if you're across from the hospital next to the Taco Bell. We built that site, and Eric Moore from Jay's Bird Barn calls me up periodically and goes, oh my gosh, you wouldn't believe what I saw here. And you know, the point is that if that feature wasn't there, that bird would not be there either. But the primary objective with those was, as stormwater runs into those that's carrying pollutants, as it's in that site, it gets cleaned. It's essentially a wetland. And so we did that work. We released that report. The state released their reports because they kind of elevated the priority for funding these local guys. We better get our act together. And then the city commissioned their own report, which came out in 2020. And one of the things that their report said is we need water treatment upstream from Watson Lake. What's upstream from Watson Lake? Watson Woods Riparian Preserve. What's a restoration project? Very natural green infrastructure project. So this was kind of, we were like, all right, great. We're helping you implement your plan already. And kind of where that ties in, if we jump to the next slide here. One of the things that we're working on with the city of Prescott right now is extending the preserve boundary to the north, and then securing the conservation values of the preserve with a legal document called a conservation easement that would preserve those values for all time going forward. And Prescott Audubon has been a donor and sent some money our way to support those efforts. We feel like we're very close. We're hoping that this is going to be the year that we actually get that done. We've got a bunch of funding tied up in getting that in place. But we're super excited about it because in that first management plan back in 1996, we said the northern boundary, which is kind of this arbitrary thing in the middle of the riparian zone, should be extended at such time that it becomes feasible. The reason that that boundary is there today is in 1995, upstream from that boundary was City of Prescott property. Downstream from that boundary was Chino Valley Irrigation District. So there was no opportunity at that point to extend further up. An arbitrary political boundary doesn't have anything to do with the ecosystem, but nobody's managing that from a restoration and conservation perspective. It's part of the lake. So it's not all a done deal, but the conversations have been very positive. We've got a lot of utilities in there that we're working with Public Works and trying to figure out how do we accommodate all that. But stay tuned, because when we get this done, there's going to be a big celebration. And Prescott Audubon Society is part of what's making this happen. So we'll jump to the next slide. One of the other things I mentioned, Granite Creek cleanup. This is the shameless self-promotion portion of the program. Is Granite Creek cleanup, I mentioned, happens on Earth Day this year, April 22nd, which is really exciting. And on average, we've been getting about 500 people who come out for a couple hours, pick up trash, and give them all a fancy t-shirt. And our creeks come out a little bit cleaner. Everybody goes home feeling tired, and they have made a difference. So we encourage you to sign up for that. We should have the sign up stuff on our website in the next week or so. Registration will be required again this year. That's worked really well for us. If you're not into picking up trash and bending over that much, we can use your help kind of behind the scenes is what we call it. So a lot of different ways to be involved. So that's coming up. And I think the next slide is some statistics that show in the 15 years that our organization has been meeting this event, we've had 7,000 people participate. And if you do the math and kind of monetize the labor, that's $400,000 worth of labor. It's a lot of labor. Thank you very much, community. And then you can see how participation has kind of gone up and down over the years, but the trend is more people want to be involved. And the other interesting trend that took a little bit of time for me to wrap my head around is the amount of trash that we're getting that's going down. And I said, oh, are we giving everybody a t-shirt to go for a hike? Maybe, but there's less trash out there. Maybe because people are picking up bags full of trash and saying, you know what, I'm going to put that bungee cord on the bin so the javelina don't knock it over and have it blow in the creek. I think folks are just becoming more educated. Maybe we've got better systems with the waste transfer station. I don't know, but this is a good problem to have. So it's kind of exciting to see the data in that way. And then the picture up there, the weird gargoyle, we called that the creepiest trash that we found last year. I don't know what it was, but it's creepy. Okay, let's jump to the next slide. So if you're sufficiently interested in what I've had to say tonight, you can learn more by visiting our website at prescottcreeks.org. We've got a ton of information up there about all this stuff that I talked about tonight. We've got an e-newsletter that goes out. We try to get it out monthly, but I like to say periodically because it doesn't always happen monthly. So you can sign up for the e-newsletter. We promise never to be that group where you're like, oh my gosh, more email from these guys. And then volunteer opportunities. We could not have gotten anything done that we have gotten done without community volunteers. And I think the description suggested that I was kind of a one-man show. I am the staff at Prescott Creeks. That is accurate. But I've got a crew of 4 or 5 people who come enter data and manage all the paperwork in the office. We've got a board of directors of 4 members, and then we've got a handful of folks who are working out in the field on a regular basis. So I'm just the conductor. They're all making music, and some of those people are in this room tonight. So IBA surveys, again, we've got to sign up in the back. If you want to give us your information, we'll let you know when we get those scheduled. As you might have seen from that table, we do 2 surveys in the spring and 1 in the late summer. Granite Creek cleanup, as we've talked about, we've always got field work going, whether we're planting stuff or vegetation management is kind of a fancy way to say pulling weeds. We have a lot of non-native species that we're trying to get out of the preserve. And then we're always looking for great minds and folks to help kind of guide the ship. So if you're interested in being on our board of directors, The yellow button up at the top right of the website is the get involved or take action, I think is what it says. And so you can see about all our different volunteer opportunities, those sorts of things. And then that red button is all about donating. We like it when people check that button, but I'm not here to fleece money out. So I think I'm almost at time, but if I remember correctly, the next slide. I always like to tell a story about why I do this work. And, you know, because I don't get out in the field nearly as much as I would like to, because I'm diddling the computer and on the phone and writing grants and doing all that fun stuff. But being out in the field is really what it's about for me. And when we were doing the restoration work, we planted cottonwoods. So when we plant cottonwoods, we actually harvest branches off mature cottonwoods of various sizes, sometimes quite large. And then we plant those, we dig holes in the floodplain. And as we try to get down to the water table, sometimes those holes are relatively deep, 6, 8 feet. We use big yellow machines, backhoes, to dig those holes. And so it doesn't feel like you're doing restoration. You know, backhoes are smelly and loud. And we had a crew, they were a volunteer crew, international students. And on this particular day, I think it was a Sunday, and it had snowed overnight. And then it warmed up, so it was raining. So it was all muddy and sloppy, and it was continuing to drizzle. And we were all wet and muddy, and nobody was having any fun. And we had 2 backhoes on site digging these holes. And so most of the crew was kind of in this area. And all of a sudden, both backhoes turned off at the same moment. And it got quiet. And the clouds parted. And a shaft of sunlight showed down on these cottonwoods that we had just planted. And the way these cottonwoods look is they're just sticks poking up out of the mud. And I'm seeing this happen. And a troop of about 12 or 15 Western bluebirds flies in, and they all perch on these cottonwoods that we just planted. Maybe for 30 seconds, if that, and then they flew away. And the clouds closed and the backhoe started. But you know, as that was happening, my jaw was on my chest and I was looking around, who else is seeing this? And there were like 2 or 3 other people that saw it too. And we were all just like, big eye. But for the rest of the day, I didn't notice the mud. I didn't notice that it was wet and sloppy and that I was tired and cold. I don't think I touched the air. I was walking about that far above the ground. So it's experiences like that. And Maria heard another story that's the same flavor the other night. But I'm fortunate. I've got a bag full of these stories, and I'm not making any of that up. It all happened exactly like we said. There was no music accompanying. But you know, it's experiences like that. And for me, you know, as that happened, I said, oh, this is what we are doing. This is what restoration is all about, for me anyway. Okay, next slide. So that's my show. Hopefully I have answered every conceivable question that anybody could have. But if there is time, I'll defer to our technical person here. If there's time, I am more than happy to answer any and all questions that folks may have. Perfect.
Michael, couldn't help but notice that the lakes are very high.
The lakes are very full. I believe both lakes are still present.
So what does that do to your location?
Well, this is one of the things that we're hoping to look at. Obviously, when the lakes are full, the creek has more water in it. At Watson Lake, when it's at full pool, I think is the term that they use. We actually have lake water in the Granite Creek Channel, almost all the way up to Prescott Creeks Parkway. And so back before the restoration project, you could kayak almost that far up. It's very brushy now. People are still doing it, or have done. So, you know, from one perspective, it adds a lot of, it elevates the groundwater. That's good for certain species, not good for other species. For anybody who's watched for a long time, since the city has owned Watson Lake, 1998, I think is when the city bought the lake. The management objective has been to kind of keep that as full as possible from a recreation standpoint and from a water recharge standpoint. And we don't necessarily have data to back this up because we haven't been keeping it. But kind of my observation has been we are seeing fewer cottonwoods downstream because the soils with the higher lake levels are saturated. There's not as much oxygen in the soils. So red willows can handle saturated soils. They get their oxygen some other way. Cottonwoods need to take up a lot of oxygen through the soil. And so I think over time, if the lake is kept full, we're going to see fewer cottonwoods downstream. So those are things that as we look at that groundwater data from a long-term perspective, part of what we need to do, I don't know if we're going to do this round, but we'd like to see if we can draw some correlations between what's happening with the lake bodies and what's happening with our groundwater levels. So there are impacts. You know, the simple view is water is good. So we'll go with that until we've got other data to know for certain. So,
part of the IBA area is Willow Lake,
correct.
which has wonderful natural features. Are you investing any time in that area? Can you talk about that?
Historically, we have not, we don't have any management authority, but we have attempted to coordinate with the Recreation Services Department of the City of Prescott, both on wildlife issues as well as riparian habitat issues. And what the city is presently doing is kind of, I'm not sure if they're terming it a master plan, but they're initiating a planning process for Willow Lake as a whole. Hopefully Audubon filled out a survey and gave your 2 cents. But one of the things that we pitched in that response to that survey was that we think Willow Lake would make a great preserve. And potentially parts of it could be protected with conservation easement to secure those conservation values. So we put in our 2 cents. I heard through the grapevine that they put out a planning contract for bid and received no bids. And I suspect that's because they're really still figuring out exactly what they want to do. So I think collectively, we as a community, not just Prescott Creeks, but I think we as a community and not-for-profit organizations have an opportunity to kind of help the city figure out what they want to do. I think they're handling water issues and the recreation services and some of the other things that are kind of lumping that all together, which you can't really separate, but maybe they need separate sub-buckets. So I'm not sure where the city's headed with that, but I think in the next year or 2, we've got an opportunity to really kind of insert ourselves into that process and hopefully see some good outcomes. So, way in the back.
How long is it?
How long? Watson Woods Riparian Preserve?
Yeah, how long?
So 126 acres, and it's roughly about a river mile. So if you fly straight through, it might not be quite a mile, and then at its widest point, it's about a quarter of a mile in width. And in terms of floodplain habitat, there's really nothing like that that we've got here in the area. Willow Lake has some big broad areas, but those are more influenced by the lake than by river processes. So it's really unique in that respect. Anybody else that I haven't gotten a question from yet? Okay, just back to you.
So there's a organization pattern. which is trying to preserve the granite belts
Yes,
as a regional park.
yes.
How would that affect your operation?
I think that would be fantastic. Our view has been, and I think we've got some language in the comprehensive plan where we first described it. But the historical references indicate that we had pretty extensive riparian forest in this area, pre-settlement. So, you know, our estimate has been maybe 1,000 acres or more, stretching from the Granite Dells all the way up to what's downtown Prescott. Granite Creek Park area probably being, you know, the most robust area. We kind of had to cobble that together from a lot of the historical anecdotes, historical writings from Fort Whipple. They had a naturalist that came out and listed off species that we said, yeah, that makes sense. But you know, we got to remember in the 1860s, nobody was running around with their iPhone, snapping pictures of everything in 10 seconds. So from a restoration standpoint, one of our biggest challenges was what should this place look like? And that's why we had to kind of use the Southwestern regional model, they were kind of mathematical, because we just don't know. So I think from a habitat perspective, Grand Creek flows through that area or on the edge of the area. That's a fantastic thing. And, you know, we've largely got Granite Creek under somewhat unified management. The city has most of Granite Creek from the Dells upstream to the industrial park. And so I think if we add in the Glassford Hill Park, whatever it ends up becoming called, that's all kind of one unit that can enjoy some similar management and a lot of natural area that's a cohesive block. You know, those sorts of things, the devil is always in the details of, you know, what uses are allowed on the trails and where the trailheads and all that kind of stuff. But I think securing the property and getting everybody pointed in the same direction is a huge step. I was just thinking about this Glassford Hill initiative. And for anybody who's been around for a long time, Elizabeth Ruffner was talking about preserving Glassford Hill back in the 90s. And I think everybody was poo-pooing her. That's crazy talk. Here it is 20 years later. Unfortunately, Elizabeth's not with us, but she's watching. So I think it's fantastic. It looks like it's going to happen. And it's good.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question was, would an entity like the Nature Conservancy come in what context are you thinking? Yeah, the Nature Conservancy, what I can say is the Nature Conservancy has been and continues to be a partner that we coordinate with and talk to all the time. They, as I understand it, are kind of looking at bigger landscape type projects. So in particular, they're looking at pronghorn to the north of us and some of the habitats that ultimately flow into the Byrd River. What I was told is before I got involved and before Prescott Creeks, you know, focused on Watson Woods Riparian Preserve, that Nature Conservancy was consulted. And I think at that point in time, they said, hey, we're working on bigger projects. You've got some local entities that could probably get this done. And so I think with groups like Prescott Creeks, Prescott Audubon, Natural History Institute, you know, programs like Master Naturalist, I think we're getting it done here locally. And so I often look to Nature Conservancy and go, yeah, they're doing cool stuff. We want to emulate that model. We don't have their donor base, but we can follow the same principles that they've done if those apply. So hopefully that's responsive to the question. So, perfect. Okay, well, I'm seeing it's edging up toward 1/4 after. I don't know if you guys want to go home and get in bed, but I'll hang around for a while if folks want to talk one-on-one. But thank you for the opportunity. hand that to you because you know where the off switch is. Oh, wait a minute, before you go, Eric Moore at Jay's Bird Barn has some pretty awesome stuff going on. You can win big prizes by going out and looking at birds or joining Prescott Audubon. So he's got brochures on the table. So check those out. There, now he can't tell me I didn't do it. Absolutely, enjoy it. Good, I'm glad. Have you